The views and opinions expressed in this presentation are those of the producer and those appearing in the show and do not necessarily represent the views of DerryCam, the Town of Derry, or any of its staff or affiliates. Hi, I'm Anthony Henry. Welcome back to America's Ask. We're here on episode 58 or 59. I've lost track. We've still been away for a bit. I'm still getting used to it again, but we're back and the news keeps rolling. And it's going to be an interesting week in New Hampshire politics. The first real session of the year where we're actually doing bills is tomorrow. So I brought someone who knows more about bills and process than anything. Former Speaker of the House and new Merrimack County Commissioner, Steve Shurtleff. Thank you for coming on. Please tell the audience about yourself.
Well, my name is Steve Shurtleff. I was born and raised in Concord and live in Ward 1, the village of Pennacook, which is part of the greater city of Concord, and retired from the U.S. Marshal Service. And in 2004, I ran for the New Hampshire House and got elected and spent 20 wonderful years in the House. I was minority leader, majority leader, and speaker. And when you mentioned about the session tomorrow, I think a little tear came to my eye. I miss the House. I enjoy now being a county commissioner from Merrimack County and some wonderful people on the commission, but a little bit of my heart has been left in the New Hampshire House. And I just want to add that you've got some wonderful representatives from the town of Derry, and I'm not going to start mentioning them because I'll leave somebody out and then I'll feel awful, but you people in Derry are proud to call them your reps, and I'm proud to call them my friends. So.
Thank you for coming on, and you're right. We have some amazing reps here in town. We actually have, in terms of membership, the largest district because we have 10 members for one town.
Yeah.
Typically, larger towns or cities are separated into wards. We're not.
Yeah.
So we have a unique group, and I'm glad that they're my reps also. So I guess we'll start with your time in the House because that's where we can cover the most ground. I'll start with the big question. What do you think some of your biggest accomplishments were as a representative?
Well, to me, I think the biggest accomplishment as a state rep is the bill that I introduced, which was my reason for running for the New Hampshire legislature. And for me to run for the House is somewhat surprising because I'm a bit shy, a little bit introverted. And, I'm a Vietnam veteran. And I had read an article in the Stars and Stripes newspaper when I was in Vietnam about a pilot in World War II who was shot down over the Philippines. And on December 10th of 1941, 3 days after Pearl Harbor, he was an Army Air Corps bomber pilot, and his name was Colin Kelly. And his aircraft sunk Japanese shipping off the Philippines 3 days after Pearl Harbor. On the way back to Clark Field, their plane caught on fire. They were attacked by Japanese Zeros. And Captain Kelly had the crew bail out, and he stayed at the controls to keep it stable while they jumped. And after the last man jumped, the plane exploded in fire in midair, and he died. And President Roosevelt was notified that the United States had had an offensive action against the Japanese, and which the president was glad to hear. But then he learned that Captain Kelly had died and left a wife and a 3-year-old son back home in Florida. And so President Roosevelt wrote to whomever was the president in the year 1956, and that happened to be General Eisenhower. And he said, Mr. President, as you write this, the year is 1956. But as I write this note, we are engaged in a great war. And I know that democracy will triumph over fascism. He says, I know it because of the great men and women serving in our armed forces, people like Captain Colin Kelly. He said, Mr. President, Captain Kelly was a West Point graduate. And when he died, he left a 3-year-old son, who this year, 1956, will turn 18. I would ask you, on behalf of a grateful nation, to appoint Captain Kelly's son to West Point. And and President Eisenhower did, and Captain Kelly's son went on. And he closed his note by saying, the least a country can do for those who have given their lives to defend our nation is make sure their children get a proper education. And Captain Kelly's son graduated from West Point and became a brigadier general. And he was an Army veteran of Vietnam when the wars in Afghanistan and Iraq were starting, and our National Guard here in New Hampshire was activated, and people were losing their lives. I thought about what I read in Stars and Stripes, and I said, New Hampshire ought to do something for the men and women in the armed forces if they should, from New Hampshire, if they should lose their life serving our country. And so I talked to my rep then about the idea of this bill, and he said, well, and he was very pleasant, very nice, but he said, well, your nation's going to go against it, it's going to cost money. He says, I don't think so. So I ran and I won, and I introduced this bill, and with a lot of help from both Democrats and Republicans and veterans and non-veterans, the bill was passed, and Governor Lynch with a public bill signing. And already I understand several young people have taken advantage who have lost their parent in the armed forces and have gone on to it. The bill says for any state college, state university, or a community college, you'll get up to 4 years of college if they meet the entrance requirements. So that was the first bill I introduced, and to me, it's always very special. It's a long story, and I do, but
all the time you need, and it's a really good story, and I think that's an important bill. I think we need to see more like that.
Yeah.
And when we were talking in the hall before we started filming, we were talking about how things seem more divided than they were back then.
Yeah.
In a way, yes. But in reality, and I've mentioned this, I mentioned this last week when I had Representative Abul Khan on, it really isn't as much as you would think. And I can use the New Hampshire House as an example. If you go up there and watch, sure, things can get a little feisty sometimes, but if you go in the lunchroom and watch them eat lunch, everyone's friends, really.
Yeah.
And I remember watching C-SPAN, watching the U.S. Congress. It was some big event. I think it was when they ousted Kevin McCarthy as Speaker, or like one of the impeachment trials or something. But I remember seeing Representative Sheila Jackson Lee, a Democrat from Houston, talking to Representative Matt Gaetz, probably one of the most controversial Congress members of all time, really. And they were buddying it up. Those are two people you would never expect to see talking friendly. They were laughing and smiling and all that. It's not as divisive as people think. And there's a lot of good people there. And there's a lot of good bills, like former Speaker, County Commissioner Shurtleff's first bill. Well,
I first came to the House in 2004, and I'm a Democrat, but behind me was a Republican, because that's the way it worked out. A great guy, an older man. Well, I used to think he was old, but now I'm in my 70s, so I realized he wasn't that old at all. But he said to me, coming to the New Hampshire House, this is your freshman year. It's a lot like going to a county fair here in New Hampshire. And I said, what do you mean? He says, you go to a county fair and you see people over by the show horses, and they're all curried and the hoofs are polished and combed out, and they're oohing and ahhing and taking a picture of those show horses. But he said, you want to get a job done, you go over to the horse barn, you get a work horse to get that job done. He said, that's like being in the New Hampshire House. You're going to see a lot of show horses, and you see that on session day. He said, but if you want a job done, you go to a work horse. And in committees, that's where the work gets done. And, people have their principles and their beliefs and their philosophies, but that's where compromises are made and people do the right thing. It's when you come to the floor of the New Hampshire House, you get people, as I said, the show horses that'll jump up every so often and say something, but it's the work horses in committee, and they get it done, and that's what comes to the floor. So, the House has divided, more far left, more far right, but still, the New Hampshire House is the finest legislative body in the country because of that.
And you bring up another good point. I've learned in my few years of being involved that oftentimes the quietest people are the ones that do the most work.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, keeping with your time in the House, I think it reached its apex when you became Speaker. So.
Yeah.
Bring us through that. What was that like? And you were Speaker at the start of COVID, so
yeah, that was unique.
Talk about that as well.
Well, I was very, pleased. I'd always had a good relationship with our House speakers and a lot of respect and admiration for regardless of their party. And in 2018, I was fortunate to be elected Speaker of the House. And it was a unique experience. And at first, being up at the podium, and I'll tell you something. I told this to my friend, the current Speaker, Sherm Packard. I said, because he can be a little boisterous at times, kind of a short fuse, but he's a wonderful speaker and a good friend. And I said, what I did, Mr. Speaker, when I became Speaker, was like an actor playing a role. Don't do what you think you would do. Do what somebody who was acting as a speaker, how they would perform and how they would act. And by keeping your composure when people are trying to get you upset and just doing the right thing for everybody. And it worked for me. I enjoyed it. I had a lot of good friends. In fact, I'm a Democrat, and I had Democrats in my caucus say, you're being too nice to the Republicans. And I said, you got to understand something. I'm not the Democratic Speaker of the House. I'm the Speaker of the House who happens to be a Democrat. And there is a very big difference. And that's why I tried to act as Speaker, try to be fair to everybody.
Yeah, I've tried to go into archives and watch some of the older House sessions because that's just the kind of stuff I do. I'm not a normal teenager. And I only managed to find one session throughout your entire time as Speaker online. Only one. I forget what day it was. I know it was in 2018.
Okay.
No, 2019, because 2018 was when you were elected in December.
Yeah.
So it was in 2019. It was before COVID. And I remember it was in May, and what you said is what I thought, because I know Speaker Packard too. You're very calm, very cool. So
well,
I noticed
yeah. I have a theory, and I don't know if there's any fact to it, but I think in some respects either a House committee, and I chaired criminal justice at one time, and or the House of Representatives can somewhat take on a personality of a speaker. Well, not maybe so much the personality, but their state of mind. And if they're calm and rational and composed, the House will tend to be that way too. So, yeah, I always try to, play it down the middle. Everybody had a voice.
And what was your day-to-day like as Speaker of the House? Because it's strange, because it's kind of a full-time job, like being a rep, but even more so.
Yeah.
But it's still not a full-time job, really.
Well, you get extra money. You get extra $25 a year, so that's
true.
where the money is. So it's 125 instead of the 100. Yeah, you're busy all the time because everybody wants to speak to you about something. And I always had an open door policy, so I had representatives come in and just, I always said, if I'm on the phone, I'll shut the door. If I'm meeting with somebody, I'll shut the door. If the door is open, come on and sit down and talk to me. That's fine. So there was always somebody coming in, but yeah, I enjoyed that. I did. And but of course, as you alluded to, we had COVID, and that was a difficult part. And again, I got to thank the staff, both Democratic staff and Republican staff and joint staff. We got through that okay, and a great appreciation to the University of New Hampshire at Durham for allowing us to use the hockey field house there for our sessions. There was one brief time, I think it was 1864, that the House did not meet in its chambers. They used the Merrimack County Courthouse because they're doing renovations during the Civil War. And so we spent, I think it was 3 months meeting at Durham, and that was quite an ordeal because probably 2/3 of the House members were wearing masks because of COVID, but there was probably about 1/3, maybe not quite that much, that didn't want to wear a mask. They didn't think it was necessary, but you could not tell them, well, you can't come in, you're not wearing a mask. They have a right to represent their constituents. So we had 3 sections. We had Democrats, Republicans, and those that didn't wish to wear a mask, and that made it a little bit unique, but it worked out. I had some problems with some of our members. I found out after a session that a couple of people actually brought beer into the House chamber, and I rarely got mad, but I did get mad that day because I said, this is the New Hampshire House chamber. We could be meeting in a field, but where we meet, that is our chamber. And we've got to show it the respect that the people of New Hampshire expect us to.
Before we get to county stuff, because that's what you're doing now,
Yeah.
let's talk about your last couple terms where you weren't in leadership. You were
Right.
Speaker Emeritus, like the term where it was very, very evenly divided, which was the most recent one, and the
Yeah.
one before that, which
Right.
was right after Republicans took the House back, and we had Speaker Hinch and then Speaker Packard.
That's where I lost my $25 pay raise. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, I didn't run for leadership by that session. I figured, I'm getting older now. Maybe it's the time to pass that torch to another generation. But I was glad to see Sherman Packard become speaker because, like I said, he's a good speaker and a good friend. It was unique not to really be in leadership. Although I had a lot of bills I'd speak on or do parliamentary inquiries at different things and kept active, and I was on the New Hampshire Canadian Trade Council and other things. So it was an interesting session because we were still in the grips of COVID. Our Democratic leader that session was Rennie, my mind's going back, Cushing from Hampton, and sadly he passed away, and David Cody was the deputy leader, and he had a health issue that kept him away from the chamber. So it was a different kind of a session. And again, we were still meeting the first part of it in different locations around the state. And but again, I give a lot of credit to Speaker Packard and both Democrats and Republicans on both sides. The House continue to serve, and I think it just shows the New Hampshire people that the vast majority are there for the right reasons, and because of that, our House will always serve and always serve efficiently.
That's true. I was getting involved in... I've always been involved in local stuff since I was around 13 years old. That's when I started attending school board meetings. I didn't really get involved in the state stuff until the tail end of the, I guess, 21 to 22 session.
Mm-hmm.
So right there was when I started getting involved. And then my first full term, where I went the whole way paying attention, was this past one, where it was basically a tie the whole time.
Yeah.
Leader Wilhelm and Speaker Packard were, behind closed doors they were like that, and on the floor it was very contentious. What was that term like, especially as your last term?
It saddened me. It really did. If I had to use a word, sad. Because I knew people. It was almost like a Jekyll and Hyde. Some very good people on both sides, but when they came into the chamber, sometimes they'd be so impassionate about what they believed in, and things were said and done. And there was a few that just don't seem to think that the House rules apply to them at all. And we had episodes of that. But again, my gratitude and appreciation to Speaker Packard for the excellent job he did. It was contentious, and people, shouting, yelling out, and again, a lot of them were the show horses, the ones that don't do the work, but are there they have something to say on everything. It saddened me to see it devolve into this kind of an attitude, and but I think under Speaker Packard's leadership and good people on both sides, I think things will come back well again this session.
I think partially it'll come back because it's not a tie anymore.
Well, that has a lot to do with it. But sometimes that can, aggravate people even more. And I think there's a feeling, and on the Democratic side, there are a lot of Democrats that thought this was going to be the year they were going to take back the majority. And instead of taking back the majority, they actually lost like 20, 25 seats. And I think there's a degree of disappointment in that respect. And I think some of them are measuring for new drapes in the speaker's office. But and because of that, I think, and then on the other side, there are some that say, now we got a good big majority. We don't have to be so nice to the minority that we can pass anything we want to pass. And so that can cause for some anxiety.
I've kind of equated it to what Donald Trump has been doing right now.
Yeah.
I think that the House, the Senate, the Executive Council, and the governor are all going to take advantage of these big majorities while they have them. Because I'm going to predict for next election in 2026, one of those things, I don't know which one, Republicans are going to lose at least one of those things. I don't know if it will be the House, Senate, Council, or governor. But if you look at, I guess, election statistics, midterms always go the opposite way of the incumbent party.
Yeah.
Good example would be 2018, when Trump had his first term and House became Democrat majority, U.S. House. I think, and same with New Hampshire, because that was when you became Speaker that year.
Yeah.
So I think it'll be a similar scenario this time, unless Republicans are able to not just get everything they want done, but back it up properly and somehow find a way to counteract that wave that always happens after an election.
You know, you raised a good point, but you talked about the governor, and when I chaired the Criminal Justice Committee, she was the Attorney General, and she'd be in our committee a lot. And I've got tremendous respect for Kelly Ayotte. Her work as AG in the U.S. Senate, and I think she's going to be an outstanding governor. She's her own person, and she may look at a bill that comes to her desk and say, well, the Republicans passed this, and she might say something that she's in that bill that she doesn't think is right for New Hampshire, and she'll veto it. She has her own mind. She's not like a lot of people years past, my party right or wrong. She'll look at every bill that comes and judge it on its merits. And I think that's healthy for democracy. And I think it's something that some Republicans in the House will keep in mind. And they may even talk to her how she feels on certain issues. But I think she is going to be, I think she's, as I said, an excellent governor, but I think she's going to do the right thing. And if the bill, she sees something wrong with it, she'll have no qualms in vetoing it.
So now moving on to county. Obviously, you haven't been there that long, so it's not too much you can talk about. But what's it like making the jump from legislative to county? It's not exactly a rare thing. Our former county commissioner, Brian Shurtleff, who lost in the primary this past time, but he was a state representative for 5 terms before he was a county commissioner. Wow. So it's not unusual, but I don't think many people expected you to run for county office. So what's the jump in?
I didn't expect me to run for county office, to tell you the truth. The commissioner from Concord, Tara Reardon, excellent county commissioner. People had asked her to run for the state senate, which was vacant, and she is a former House member and very competent. And she had mentioned to me, she said, I'm going to run for the Senate seat. Would you be interested in running for county commissioner? And I said, yeah, that would be, because, you know, as part of our House responsibilities, as you knew, Anthony, we're part of the county delegation, so we have interaction with the legislative branch for the county. And so I'm very proud of Merrimack County government. We've seen some counties in New Hampshire regretfully have some problems over the years, but New Hampshire has always done a wonderful job serving the people. And there are things there that are important to me, the nursing home and the county jail and the administration of county government. So I was glad to run for the seat that Tara held and to be elected. And there's a true spirit of bipartisanship. You mentioned Commissioner Loveland earlier, and Stuart Tracy is our chair. And as I mentioned, I'm a Democrat, and they belong to the Republican Party. But all the partisanship stops at the door. At our commissioners' meetings, we look at what comes up and what is best for the county and act accordingly. And I'm very proud to serve with them, and I'm very proud of the job that the people of Merrimack County do.
It's relatively the same here in Rockingham County.
Yeah.
Not just in your philosophy of, because county government, I think, is more bipartisan than state or even local.
Yeah.
Because there's not really much to disagree with on controversial topics, except if there's, a disagreement on how to go about things. But
Yeah.
there's really not a lot of controversy with it. It's really the same philosophy here, so that's similar. It's the same party makeup, too. We have two Republicans here, Tom Barello and Steve Cadu, both of whom have been on the show, and Kate Coyle. So it's very similar, and I think it's similar across all counties in the state.
I think you're right, and I think it's not a question up or down. Do you want something? You're all trying to get to the same destination. The question is, what route are you going to take to get there? And that's where, not disagreement, but that's where discussions take place. And I've only been on the commission now for a month and a half, but I'm glad I ran. I do enjoy it, and I enjoy working with my fellow commissioners, and I enjoy our wonderful Merrimack County employees. They do a fantastic job. It's a quiet form of government that you don't hear a lot about, and I think you don't hear a lot about it because there is no controversy there. They're just doing their job day in, day out.
Perhaps that equates to your comparison earlier about the workhorses and show horses.
No, it could very well be.
So quickly before we end, update on some dairy stuff. I mentioned that I'd tell you who I'm supporting for school board in the next show, and I am. We have 3 very good candidates for school board that I'm supporting. Brenda Willis, longtime incumbent. She's been on the school board for over 20 years, and she's luckily running for another term. No one cares more about the kids and teachers of Derry than Brenda Willis, and I'm very happy she's running again. Richard Tripp, one of our state representatives, is running for school board as well. He's a great guy, very knowledgeable about finance stuff, and I think he'll make a great addition to the school board. And newcomer to politics, Karen Rand, local realtor. She was recently elected as one of our Republican delegates to the state committee. She's very passionate, and I'm very excited to see her run. Those are my 3 for that, and I'm also endorsing Jay Hildreth for trustee of the trust funds. He's a great guy. He's worked in investment banking, retired, so I think he can hit the ground running in that role. So we are just about out of time, so feel free to give any closing statement you may have.
Well, Anthony, I've been on a lot of talk shows, a lot of interviews. I was on CNN at one time, and I got to admit, you do such a great job with this. And this studio is beautiful, and your work as a commentator and interviewer, excellent. And I know you want to someday go on to law school, but I hope you stay in communications. You do a great job.
Thank you very much, and thank you for coming on.
It's been a pleasure.
And thank you for everything you've done for the state. And I'll remind you every episode until the election. The Derry election is March 11th, 7 a.m. to 8 p.m. at Pinkerton Academy. Register to vote and go vote because local elections are the most important. I'm Anthony Henry. This has been America's Ass. Thank you for watching.